Welcome back to another episode of the Nuclear PodBlast, the official podcast for Nuclear Blast Records. My name is Andrew Sample, happy to be here with you, delivering you music, news, tour dates, pre-order information, and all things Nuclear Blast metal. It's been a few months since the last episode. You know, schedules change, my schedule changes just like everybody else's, but it's great to be back and deliver some Nuclear Blast metal and some great information and conversations with Ross Dolan of Immolation. We're going to talk to both Ben Hutcherson and Phil Pendergast of Khemmis, as well as the one and only Peter Tägtgren of HYPOCRISY. Now, the HYPOCRISY and Khemmis interviews were done late last year around the release of those records, but I just had a chance to speak with Ross Dolan a couple of weeks ago, so it's great to have all three bands on this, the 17th episode of the Nuclear PodBlast. NuclearBlastUSA.com is your hub for information. Before we get to the interview with Ben and Phil from Khemmis, we'll do a couple of songs, the first from Hangman's Chair and the second from renowned rock and roll saviors, the Hellacopters. Hangman's Chair formed in 2005 in Paris, and the band are one of the more unique sounding doom bands currently active. Through the years, they have found and fine-tuned their own sonic brand, somewhere at the crossroads between Typo Negative, Life of Agony, and Sisters of Mercy, to name a few. The new album Loner just came out last week. This is the track Cold and Distant. It's Hangman's Chair on the Nuclear PodBlast.
This is the Nuclear PodBlast, the official podcast for Nuclear Blast Records.
Yes, the Hellacopters, Reap a Hurricane. Again, The Eyes of Oblivion, the new record out April 1st. What a great track, man. Harkens back to that grande rock era of the band, the turn of the millennium, actually, when they started to clean up the sound a little bit. The songwriting became a little bit more focused. My favorite rock band over the last quarter of a century, and probably some of yours out there as well. Nick A. Anderson and Dragon back together again for the first time since the Payin' the Dues record, which was 1997, I believe. Wow. Can't wait for that full-length record. Again, Eyes of Oblivion out April 1st. Before that, you heard Hangman's Chair, Cold and Distant from the brand new record Aloner. Just came out last week. And this is Andrew Sample with the Nuclear PodBlast. Thanks for checking us out. Let's look at some tour dates before we get into our interview with the guys in Khemmis. Municipal Waste are currently on the Decibel Magazine tour, also featuring Obituary, Gatecreeper, and Forest and Spirit World. And I just caught that show just a few days ago, actually, here in Colorado Springs at the Black Sheep. What a great lineup, man. I got a chance to say hey to Ryan Waste. Good to see you again, bro, for a few minutes before their set. Obscura are currently on the road as well in North America. However, the band had to cancel the Quebec dates on the run recently. However, shows in Syracuse, New York and Manchester, New Hampshire have been added to the run. Of course, Abysmal Dawn had to cancel their participation in that tour, unfortunately. But the dates will continue through March 21st in Santa Cruz, California. Just around the corner is the start of the rescheduled Bay Strikes Back tour featuring Testament, Exodus, and Death Angel. Dates begin April 9th in San Luis Obispo, California, 34 shows in all, winding up in Sacramento on May 25th. Can't wait to see the Denver date on that run. The Fear Factory, Static X, Dope, Mushroom Head, and Twisted dates have been postponed until 2023. Of course, with that, it's likely we'll have to wait longer to know who the new Fear Factory vocalist is, as Dino is going to roll that out with the start of that tour, I believe. So, hope to find out sooner than later. HYPOCRISY announced a North American tour recently with Karash Angren, The Agonist, and Hideous Divinity. And Destruction will be celebrating the release of their new album, Diabolical, on April 8th. And a North American tour will ensue with Nervosa in support and guests Sunlord and VX36. Those dates begin April 28th in Brooklyn and go all the way through May 29th in Baltimore. Now, although Denver Doom Masters Khemmis did play a hometown show recently on January 8th, the remaining dates on the scheduled West Coast tour had to be postponed. The band was quoted, "Due to the impact of COVID-19 on current touring conditions, we are forced to reschedule our upcoming Deceiver West Coast treks until June. We hope that you all understand and will join us in a few months at these rescheduled shows across the western half of the U.S. All previously purchased tickets are valid for the rescheduled shows where applicable, and additional dates will be announced shortly." So I had Ben from Khemmis on the PodBlast, not even 2 years ago, when Doomed Heavy Metal came out. That was the last, or the split release, rather, with their old label 20 Buck Spin and Nuclear Blast. But of course, the new album Deceiver, which came out on November 19th, is solely on Nuclear Blast now. And for the first time on the PodBlast, I had two members from a band interviewed at the same time. So it was great to talk to Ben, as well as Phil Pendergast. Now, we were originally going to gather at True Brewing in Denver. Of course, drummer Zach Coleman is a brewer there. But again, due to COVID and schedules, we ended up doing the interview through Skype, which was super cool to get their thoughts on the new album Deceiver. And as a band, they've gone through a lot emotionally, as a lot of bands have since COVID. But they were pretty vocal about expressing how it's affected their mental health, again, as a unit and individually. And I really think both Phil and Ben opened up and, gave a lot of themselves in this interview. So I was grateful for them to be so honest and open about it. And both the guys are, very articulate in their answers and their conversations. Enjoy the guys in Khemmis. The decision to move to a three-piece had quite a bit to do with 2020 as a whole and how the pandemic shutdown of the world affected the mental health of not only the world, but the band, of course. Now, the idea is that we are pre-programmed or wired to feel that life is all suffering and pain goes back centuries. I think it was Nietzsche, 125 years ago, that said to live is to suffer and to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. Lyrically, the band tackled those very topics previous to and while crafting Deceiver. I find it amazing how at one point the band was pretty much ceasing to exist, losing 25% of its foundation in the process. But here we are listening to and celebrating an album that you guys are more proud of than anything you've done in the past.
The interesting thing about suffering, and I say this as though there's only one interesting thing, but the ubiquity of suffering in the individual life as well as in the life of truly all living things. I mean, it is the one guaranteed aspect of existence, is that you will suffer. And yet we have commodified suffering and we have fetishized suffering while also minimizing the individual experience of just living through that suffering inherent to life. The reality that you will lose really everyone that you love and everything that you aspire towards, most of it won't happen. And life is generally about things not working out. And yet we never talk about how we don't have to find more suffering. In fact, for artists especially, there is this prevailing mindset, especially I think in American culture, that artists need to continually suffer in order to create great art, which is just absolutely bonkers to me, because suffering's everywhere. You don't have to dig deep in your past to find really painful trauma. And at the same time, you can't do your best work of any sort in this world when you are mired in pain, when you are drowning in, sort of untreated suffering, if you will. And that was really where we had all found ourselves, was in a place where we had all of these things that had gone unaddressed in our personal lives and in our minds and, in the band as a whole. And I don't think that's unique in so much as I think that most people are rarely, if ever, afforded the chance to step back and say, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I, sort of walking through this world in this routinized, automated fashion rather than asking why and what am I supposed to be doing? And, I hate to say like the silver lining of, the ongoing global pandemic because, God, the world is just such a dumpster fire. But really, one of the upsides is that we were put in a position where we each had to first individually and then collectively address these things. And a lot of these things being longstanding issues, for myself, my mental health and living with undiagnosed mental illness, and having to figure out where the joy was in our lives and how we could rediscover that joy, again, first individually and then collectively.
Phil, anything?
I mean, a lot of what Ben says, I think, applies to me too. And I just think that, there's something interesting about creating art the way that we have so far, where really like all of the songs are about personal suffering. And really, like for me, a lot of it is my personal suffering. And that's something that over time has become commodified very directly in a way that we haven't really had any control over, and that I think we've kind of gotten sucked up in, to where, you have people that are literally buying an edifice of like the things that I've struggled the most with in my life and decided to try and make art out of. And that's a really unusual relationship to develop to something that you've created. Like that's something that's really personal to you, then becomes something that's globally consumable and has some monetary value attached to it. And that then it can become really easy to be cynical about that and begin to feel detached from your own feelings and your ownership of your feelings. And that's something that I just kind of personally found myself really struggling with as we were kind of moving into writing a new album, is like, what do I have to say for myself at this point that I can kind of reclaim this personal relationship with my art that doesn't rely so much, whether I like it or not, on what other people think about me or what I'm doing. I was just really struggling with like, where do I find meaning in my personal experience these days? And does it matter? And is it something that's worth sharing? And why should anybody give a shit? And that was kind of the root of like sort of this conversation that I started having with myself, where I learned that I really sort of had to develop self-compassion that didn't come from my ability to achieve anything or create something, that just had to exist for the sake of existing, for myself to want to continue, really with anything in this life, but especially with the band. And that was something I had to come to terms with before I could sort of open up the creative space to recommit to doing this, and to feeling like that I still did have something to say, and that it was related to that struggle rather than trying to sort of make it about something more globally. It had to be maybe the most personal message that I've tried to share with this so far.
Thank you guys for your honesty. Seriously, when it comes to that subject, I appreciate that. Ben, you were on the PodBlast when Doomed Heavy Metal came out, the bridge album, so to speak, between 20 Buck Spin and Nuclear Blast, your Fandango, if I remember right, which was
yes.
Yeah. So now with the band being NB worldwide, you were quoted as saying you felt like you could do anything with this album. but it seems like you both perhaps had some difficulty in writing those first few songs for the album, probably a lot to do with what you just spoke about. But can you explain further about the inception of Deceiver, like right when it started, like the sparks for the album?
Sure. I mean, some of these riffs date back probably as far as 2018. But given, everything that we just talked about, revisiting those ideas through a different lens, I think helped us separate the wheat from the chaff, as it were, and to also find something interesting and compelling in those ideas that maybe wouldn't have landed the same sort of way. But all that being said, for me, the moment when this album really began was with Living Pyre. That we'd had some ideas and we talked about some things, but I distinctly remember sitting down in this very office, in this chair last summer, and picking up a guitar for the first time in quite a while. And my hands just started doing the thing they were supposed to do. And that first riff of Living Pyre started to come together. And as happens with any kind of creative endeavor, you get into that creative headspace, that flow state. And when you're really in it, you feel like there's something special and you don't want to, allow yourself to be pulled out of it. And I played guitar nonstop that day for, 8 hours, 9 hours, stopping for lunch maybe and to use the bathroom. But at the end of the day, I had a skeleton of a song, and I remember sharing it with Phil and Zach and saying, I didn't say I'm back, but I felt like I'm back. I felt like I had found that creative spark that connects me to this band, and that this band in turn fuels and makes sustainable and exciting. And it really felt like from there that Phil and I both sort of started to dial back in, and we started exchanging ideas faster and faster. I mean, there were some days we were going back and forth on the same song, 2 or 3 different drafts. Some days we would, work on more than one song in a day. And the tricky part about it was that we were doing that initial bit of writing remotely because nobody could leave their homes really. And we had to teach ourselves to use Guitar Pro, and then teach ourselves to tab things out in a reasonably efficient manner. And, we were a little bit nervous about that because it introduced a technological component to what has often felt like a purely organic process. But being on the other side of it, I can say, and I think Phil would agree, that on the one hand, it was literally the only way we were going to get anything done. We tried to play guitar together over Skype, and the latency was so bad that 1, 2, 3, 4, and we didn't start at the same time.
Phil, I'll let you elaborate in just a second. But yeah, in regards to Living Pyre, particularly, it seems a little less adventurous maybe than the rest of the record. Not in the sense of being dull or too familiar. It's definitely creative. Zach has some cool beat and time changes throughout the song, but right away the lyrics paint a bleak existence or frame of mind, and the vocals are lofty. They show Phil's wide range as well as Ben, your rougher vocals. Looking at Deceiver as a whole now, Phil, it seems like that track is a perfect lead-off track. Again, maybe with a little bit more familiarity with something that someone's heard in the past.
Yeah, I think it is a pretty adventurous album for us, and we wanted to not really deceive people too much with the first thing that they heard from it. I think it was at least important for us to some degree to feel like we're painting an accurate picture of the album with the singles, which is kind of why we went with a really doomy song for the second single, because the album is very dark, and that is kind of comprehensive of the direction of the record between the two songs. But I think going back to sort of your question and what you were mentioning there, in terms of this painting a picture pretty immediately of the headspace of the album, I sort of had 2 different moments with the album where it started to come together for me. One is with this song as well, Ben, where this is the first song that I felt like it was complete enough in concept that I could start trying to write lyrics to it. and like vocal parts. And I was just having so much trouble with the idea of like, what is this going to be about? And I had an entirely different concept in my mind for the whole album that didn't feel authentic to me anymore by the time that we had sort of reached this moment, because of the state of mind that I was kind of in and this thing that I was suffering with, which I was sort of talking about earlier. And I sort of was just journaling about it. And like the first thing I wrote was, there's nothing left to give, nothing to rake through coals that I can use to keep the flame alive inside. And I felt like that was indicative both of sort of my mental state at the time for myself, but also for my relationship to art and to our music, like feeling so alienated from it because of like this commercialized process and because of us kind of neglecting this human component of the band together for quite a while, like where we kind of were falling into the space of it becoming like more of a job type relationship rather than a personal relationship, or at least I know that I was feeling that way. And it just left me with this really sort of empty place to start from. And I think that moment journaling that, or like catalogs that pretty perfectly, and so I was really glad that those get to be the first words that the listener hears from the album. If they heard the single, it's really indicative of that headspace and kind of one of the bleaker moments on the record, I think. And so for me, that sort of helped open the floodgates to like the possibility that, just writing about this is maybe enough, and that there's enough to dig into here to inform sort of concepts for each of these songs and to provide a unifying theme that feels like the whole album is meant for a greater purpose than just being a collection of moments.
Well, Ben, you touched barely on, you mentioned the second single, House of Cadmus, being completely different than the first single. This song is like musically and tempo-wise, it's all darkness from beginning to end, like so bleak.
Yeah, this much the same way that opening with A Vernal Gate, we wanted to really make a statement about what this album is and what it is we're trying to do. Like, I think there is a level of directness with everything on this album that is much more, everything's much more direct, I'll say, than on past albums, which is not to say we've been ones to necessarily, be overly coy in the past. But I think that with this album, one of the things that really was central to us was trusting ourselves and each other to let these songs and let this album be whatever it needs to be. And so with House of Cadmus, I had that opening riff and we jammed on it off and on for, quite a while. And, that and the opening riff of A Vernal Gate are probably the two ideas that date back the farthest. And yet House of Cadmus was the last song we finished before we went into the studio, because we wanted to not feel like we had to sort of shy away from the doom influences or whether or not we even call it doom, just the slower side. We've always tried to embrace all of the different flavors, if you will, of heavy metal. And I think sometimes, especially, a few years back in our career, we might have hedged a bit on the doom side of things, if only because everyone was like, oh, you're a doom band. We're like, no, we play slow, but we do a lot of other stuff. But with this album, it really was a matter of who cares what anyone else tries to label it as being. Does it feel like it needs to be played at 90 BPM? Then that's the speed it's going to be. Does it feel like we want to have the second song throw you down into the ninth circle of hell so that you can gradually climb your way out? Then that's what it needs to be. And let's trust ourselves to make those decisions and to not only incorporate more explicit references to death in black metal, but to also feel like if we want to have a radical tempo shift or a tonal shift within or between songs, to trust that we can do it in a way that we find compelling and not feel beholden to that sort of imagined critical voice in the back of your mind that's saying, oh, but what will the reviewers here think, or what will the fans think? And just say, look, if we've done this work right and we get these songs to the point that we are excited about hearing them, then we've done the work correctly. And that's all it needs to be. Everything else is out of our hands.
The familiar art of Sam Turner is once again present on the cover. And as I was starting to kind of look at some detail, right away I picture, of course, I've seen the main character, but then I'm counting, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other characters maybe representing each of the songs. Tell me if I'm off here.
Honestly, I didn't think about that until I noticed it after,
reading too much into it
existed. No, I don't think it's too much. I mean, the shitty answer is just that that's what looked best, and that he had more figures at some points and fewer. And I was like, no, there needs to be another one there for the symmetry. And then it has to be asymmetrical a little bit. But if you want it to represent different songs, then I'm not going to deny you that opportunity either. And you probably could identify certain feelings with each of those characters that would resonate with each song. So go for it.
Very cool. Thanks again, both of you guys, for joining the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
thanks a lot, Andrew.
My favorite Nuclear Blast album of 2021, Deceiver from Khemmis. And a big thank you to Ben and Phil for taking the time. It was a few months ago, again, back before the Deceiver album came out, that we got together on Skype, the three of us. And again, thanks to both those guys for being so honest and having great conversations. That was great. The track was House of Cadmus from the Deceiver record, Khemmis, on the Nuclear PodBlast. And I'm glad I held off on purchasing a vinyl copy of that because I got one of the rare 200 issues of the variant that's called Ghostly. You got to check that out, the Ghostly variant of that Deceiver record from Khemmis. Speaking of vinyl, before we go any further, in stock right now at the Nuclear Blast online store, multiple LP variants, the new Celeste, as well as the new Hangman's Chair album. Earthless and their Night Parade of 100 Demons is out in a couple of weeks, featuring the 20-minute single Death to the Red Sun. That's a 180 Black 2 LP for $46.99. February 18th, the HYPOCRISY record Worship comes out on Orange and Black, as well as Purple, White, and Black double LP for $34.99. March 4th sees the release of Sabaton, The War to End All Wars on Pink LP. That's $26.99. Also at the NB online store, pre-orders for the Accept Too Mean to Die double silver LP for $34.99. That comes out April 1st. Eyes of Oblivion CD box set from the Hellacopters. Looks like that's out April 8th for $30.99. Again, Destruction's Diabolical out April 8th. Immolation's Act of God, the Clear and Gold LP version for $34.99 out April 15th. The Bastard Tracks from Death Angel, that LP is out April 29th. And Watain, The Agony and Ecstasy of Watain LP, $25.99. That's 6 different variants to choose from, including green marble and red marble. That's May 6th. Those are all pre-orders, again, at nuclearblastusa.com. And if you collect the little action figures that have been coming out the last few years, the Slayer Live Undead 3-pack glow figure set, the Comic-Con International exclusive version from Super 7, is $53.99. And again, you can get that at the Nuclear Blast store online. My interview with Ross Dolan from Immolation coming up shortly. You'll hear something from the album first, the first single, actually, Apostle. But before that, let's do something from Fit for an Autopsy. They just finished up a 5-week U.S. tour, and the most recent record, Oh What the Future Holds, came out back on January 14th. This is In Shadows. It's the Nuclear PodBlast.
With agony, how did they
all the latest releases, bundles, and pre-orders at nuclearblastusa.com. Subscribe to the free email newsletter and receive a 10% off coupon to the Nuclear Blast USA online store.
Andrew Sample back with the Nuclear PodBlast. We've got Ross Dolan from Immolation here via Skype, actually. We were just talking about, it's been a long time, Ross. We've met over the years and appreciate you taking the time for the Nuclear PodBlast for all the fans. And
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. We are. Thanks for having me. It's been a crazy ride, as you know, over the last year and a half. But we're finally at a point where we're about a month out from releasing the record. So all good stuff from this point forward.
Excellent. Atonement was quite an album, and I remember an interview with you during that release where you stated that the album took the, quote, normal time of about 5 months to put together from writing to recording. Well, it's been 5 years since that album, and we are now receiving Acts of God. Clue us in to the lengthy development for this release versus what you were used to in the past.
Yeah, and that's a good question because we did actually get a jump on this album as opposed to like so many of our past releases. So Bob started writing the material for this record probably sometime in 2018. So when Atonement came out in 2017, we had a busy cycle for that one. We did a lot of touring. We supported Cavalera Brothers for the Return to Roots tour. We supported Mayhem in the U.S. as well. And then we did a headlining run, and we had Blood Incantation out with us. So that was our touring cycle in the U.S. And in Europe, we did 3 tours as well during that cycle. We went to Asia and Japan and Australia and India, and we went to South America a couple of times. So we did a lot. It was a very busy touring cycle for that record. That album was received really well by the fans, by the press. So it was a good time for us, for sure. And I think coming off of that, we knew like Atonement definitely kind of raised the bar for us. It was a really strong album. So we had initially planned to take some of the beginning of 2020 off. So we finished our touring cycle in December of 2019. We planned to take a few months off, and then Bob had planned to complete the writing, and we were shooting for studio time maybe at the end of 2020, but obviously none of that happened because of the pandemic. So the pandemic, allowed us for an extra year or so to really, not stress any deadlines and to just, allow Bob to kind of create and work his magic. And, he completed, 13 songs, 2 instrumentals. So there's 15 total, pieces of music on this record. So we have a lot more to offer, which is, I guess appropriate since we had like almost 5 years now. So we give the fans a little more bang for their buck, a little extra. So, but it was nice, honestly, it was nice to have that time to really absorb the music, to, get to know the songs a lot better. It allowed our drummer Steve to have a lot more time to kind of, work his magic and create all the cool rhythms and patterns and all the embellishments and fills that he throws in, all the great cymbal work. So I think the extra time really allowed for us to create a better record, a stronger record. I think we entered the studio, much better prepared than previous releases. So, we try to, take a positive out of a negative, you know what I mean? So we use that time, productively at least. So yeah, it'll be about 5 years when this one comes out since Atonement came out. So yeah, I think, we're ready to move forward. I think, all our fans are ready to hear some new stuff finally. So we're excited.
A lot of people raving about the production. It sounds fantastic. I don't think longtime fans have to be so satisfied and impressed with what you guys have delivered here. Like you said, 15 actual pieces of music, challenging, compelling, dark and desolate, very technical, of course. The songs shape shift through peaks and valleys, time signatures like you've always been known for. So it does seem like you've really used that time wisely, like you said.
Yeah, we did, and I'm glad you enjoy it. I mean, it's so far, like, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, like I mentioned. People are noticing, the sound. They really like the production. Productions have always been hit or miss with us. Damned if you do, damned if you don't type of thing. We've had more organic, raw, dirtier productions in the past, and, we'd always kind of, get some flack about that. Why isn't it better produced? Why doesn't it sound like this? So, and then when we kind of went the more modern route, better produced, we would sometimes get some slack about that. Oh, it's overproduced now. Or, oh, I missed some more again. So, you never win in this situation. So with this record, we kind of, took the few things that, we had from Atonement that we wanted to tweak and adjust. And, we just kind of went for it, and we allowed Zach. Zach has had, obviously now over 10 years working with the band. So I think he's pretty well acclimated to what we're shooting for. It kind of straddles that line between, being well produced but not overproduced. It still has some grit. It still has a lot of feeling.
It's crushing, yeah.
All the instruments shine without outshining one another. So, it's a very hard balance to achieve. After doing this for so many years, it's very tricky, and I don't envy these guys like Zach and Paul who are trying to kind of, get the best out of the sound and out of the performances, but while still kind of staying within the realm of what the band is envisioning, and imagining. So it's definitely not easy. So I think we've probably come the closest with this one, and I'm glad everybody seems to feel the same way. So it's nice to hear for once.
Apostle is the first video and single from the album, but it's track number 15, the very last song on the record. That goes against most marketing or promotional thought in the music industry, but please give us some insight on the song becoming the first single and its placement on the record.
Apostle, ironically, was the last song Bob delivered for this record. We had the 14 songs, but it was still unfinished. We knew that. We just, Bob knew it. And after he delivered the 14th song, I forgot what the 14th song was, but I could tell you, Noose of Thorns was the first one he wrote back in 2018, and Apostle was the last song he wrote. Once he delivered Apostle and I heard it for the first time, I was like, wow, this is it became one of my favorites. I thought Apostle was a very dark, creepy song. It made sense to be the first song of the rollout because I thought it pretty much had all the elements that I think our fans will find in this record. It had the dark, creepy, heavy sections. It had, the cool overlay guitar parts. It had the explosive, extremely fast blast parts. So it was just a really cool song. I think a fun song to choose to roll out first. And yeah, I've heard a lot of, not a lot, but I've heard, a few people make comments on our social media pages like, it's too bad this is the last song on the record. It almost kind of ruins the experience, but I don't think that's true at all. I mean, this record is chock full of so much great stuff. Each song I think is a standalone. So I don't think by any means Apostle being released first as the last song on the record is going to ruin anything. There are so many gems on this record, so much stuff we didn't want to put out there. I mean, some of the obvious choices we kind of held back. We're like, no, we don't want to put our best foot forward with this one. We just want to put a strong one out there. But there's so many other songs in this record that I think are as strong, if not stronger than Apostle. But Apostle just seemed to be the logical choice because we just felt it embodied the vibe of this record, because it is a very dark song. So,
Well, let's talk about a couple other ones. Immortal Stain and Blooded are each strong tracks featuring more controlled tempos, I guess, and some pretty thoughtful drum patterns, especially during the breakdown part in Blooded. Rhythm-wise in the studio, it seems like the band is as tight as it's ever been. Yeah,
I mean, like I said, having that extra time really allowed us to shine
Sure.
more. The studio process went really smooth. This is the first time we had Alex in the studio on one of our full length. Alex, of course, recorded and played on the Morbid Visions cover we did back a couple of years back for the Nuclear Blast comp. But this was Alex's first time in the studio with us to record, one of our records. So it was cool to have him there to lay down some rhythms and to play some really amazing leads. And it's funny you mentioned the two songs you mentioned. I think the lead he played on Immortal Stain is one of my favorites on the record. It's just a very heavy, brooding, creepy part of the song. And the lead that he did was so chock full of feeling and just such a sick vibe, So yeah, I mean, he added a lot. Some of my favorite leads on this record. And the fact that his style of playing works so well with Bob's style, because Bob has a very unique style of playing, of writing, and of lead work as well. So the fact that they kind of work really well together and fit seamlessly together, I think is awesome. So that was really cool. Steve's drumming on this record, I think in general, is probably his best in my opinion. I mean, just over the top, just such unique stuff, some great patterns, like you said, very hypnotic and dark and just really cool, man. Immoral Stain has some really cool stuff, and Blooded as well. Blooded is another one. Blooded was actually the first song that we started to play out live. That was the first song we showcased to everybody, and we played that at Psycho Vegas, and we played it at the Decibel Metal and Beer Fest this past year.
Oh, cool!
And it went over really well. I mean, honestly, to play a new song for the first time and to have people react as they did to it is uncommon in our camp. So the fact that people were so receptive to Blooded when we played it for the first time at those shows was very encouraging, So,
cool.
So yeah, we can't wait for people to hear all of these songs, and I'm glad you picked two songs that are both very different. Immoral Stain's, a slower, heavier song, while Blooded is more of just a short firecracker, that big, heavy middle section. So two completely different songs. Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm glad you enjoyed those.
Yeah, well, of course. Another one that stood out to me is Derelict of Spirit with that 3/4 time signature up front. And again, Bob's, signature dissonant and layered chords. That song also displays Immolation's ability to make the slow and plodding songs just as compelling and interesting as anything that's hyper fast or super technical over the top. So,
thanks. I'm glad you said that because it's always writing the slower songs sometimes comes easier for Bob. Usually he has a lot more slower material, some of that more heavier mid-paced material than he does some of the more explosive stuff. But on this record, it was reverse. He had a lot of the more explosive songs, and Derelict of Spirit came towards the end of the project. I think that was song number 8. So it was actually kind of in the middle,
Yeah.
But there are definitely some slower, heavier, more mid-paced songs on this record. But I think all the songs have a lot to offer. I think even the more mid-paced songs do have their faster, more explosive parts. And as with the faster songs, I think there's a good blend of fast and slow in all the songs, just to keep it interesting. All fast sometimes gets monotonous to me, and as does all slow. So I think you need a good balance. So that's, I think, what he tries to achieve, Well,
we're going to hit the time machine here real quick. I remember hearing Dawn of Possession for the first time when I was hosting College Metal Radio Show, as I told you earlier. Immolation showed such command at the time, way back then, as well as a different variety of song styles compared to, like what was coming out of Florida at the time. What influences would you say that Immolation had in those days, or what was different with your camp that helped set the band apart from so many others in those formative years?
If you talk to all the bands that were around during that time and all the bands put out records, I think in a general sense, we all came from the same place as far as inspirations and influences, So for us, specifically, that earlier thrash stuff, specifically the German thrash movement, which had, I think, a darker variety of thrash, and when I say that, if you compare like early Creator and early Destruction and early Sodom, if you compare those to some of the earlier thrash bands from the United States, they were different. Now, granted, we had fucking awesome thrash bands, early Exodus, Bonded by Blood, and Nuclear Assault, their first album and EP, and the Metallica early stuff, Ride the Lightning,
Sure.
Slayer, all those bands. Possess was a huge influence on us, and then early black metal stuff, and I cite like Battery as kind of like the start of that movement for me.
Absolutely.
So that was the stuff that kind of inspired us, but I think we leaned more heavily towards like the more European sound, because it was just darker, heavier, more aggressive, almost straddling the line between black and death metal, even back then as thrash bands, you know what I'm saying? So it was always the darker stuff that we gravitated towards. So I guess our sound, and even our choice of studios back then for the first record, we chose to go to Music Lab and use Harris Johns because of the bands I just mentioned.
Creator, of course,
yeah. Yeah, Creator and Voivod and Sodom, all the bands he had worked with, and those are the bands that we loved. So it was a no-brainer for us. We were given the choice between Harris Johns, Colin Richardson, or Scott Burns. And this in no way, lessens their talents. I mean, Scott Burns was an amazing producer, and he took this music into a direction that had never gone before, production-wise. And I thought Colin Richardson did the same when Symphonies of Sickness came out. That was fucking sick. Amazing record. Loved it. But for us, our sweet spot was Harris Johns, and the Music Lab sound. That's what we wanted. So, nothing negative against the other producers we were given the option for, but just that Harris fit in better with where we were, at that time and what we were looking for.
Sure.
So maybe that's the reason. Maybe that's why we sounded different. Maybe just because we came from a different place, and we were, we were just looking for something different. That's all.
Gotcha. Well, you guys will start supporting the new album, Acts of God, starting on release day, actually, with a U.S. tour that kicks off in Richmond, Virginia, with Imperial Triumphant and Mortiferum in support. Looks like a Denver date on March 9th at the Oriental Theater, so I plan on seeing you there, my man.
Awesome, man. Well, definitely, man. I hope we meet and we could have a drink together and reminisce about the earlier days.
Congratulations on the new record, Acts of God. Just stunning as usual, and look forward to the whole next couple of years. You guys supporting the record?
Yeah, man, we're looking forward to hopefully a busy and productive touring cycle. I mean, right now, I think at the gate we're focusing on the U.S., and that'll be the case, I think, throughout this year. And then next year, I think we'll kind of, start to hit Europe a little more aggressively. It just doesn't seem like it's a good time right now, so we'll probably hold off on that. But yeah, I mean, we're excited. We're trying to, stay as positive as possible. Looking forward to, this coming year. So let's hope for the best.
This insane crusade
That's the second single and video from the new Immolation record, Act of God. Comes out February 18th. That is The Age of Light. Another stellar track from that record. And thanks to Ross Dolan for a super interview. Love talking to that guy. He's very candid, very open, and just matter of fact. Always been a great presence, and I appreciate him for that. Another guy I've known for a long time, but it's been several years, is Peter Tägtgren from HYPOCRISY and Pain fame, and as a producer as well. I think the last time I saw him and got to hang out in person would have been one of the Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles fests here in the U.S., maybe 2004. The new album, of course, came out back on November 26th. Worship has that late 90s, early 2000s feel, but again, a variety of styles and speeds as HYPOCRISY always delivers. And as you'll hear Peter say, he's always moved forward. He's never looked back with this band. Why? Why look back, right? So before we get to the interview with Peter, let's do the title track from the album, Worship. It's HYPOCRISY on the Nuclear PodBlast. Hey, we're back with the Nuclear PodBlast, and a huge pleasure to have Peter Tägtgren on Skype with us. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time for the Nuclear PodBlast. It's been a while, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Well, it's been 8 years since the release of End of Disclosure, which is actually the best charting album in the Hypocrisy catalog. Now, sales charts are a little different now than what they were years ago, but that was the first album to register on the charts in the U.S., Germany, Austria, Sweden, France, Switzerland, and Finland. So did you feel any pressure when it came to focusing on finishing the writing of the new record and recording because of the critical and sales success of the previous album?
No, not really. I mean, it took a long time to really Jones for it again, to be honest. I think we overdid it, End of Disclosure tour. I mean, we did a lot of tours on that album, and
maybe burn yourself out a little bit.
Deranged after that kind of, and I kind of wasn't so inspired anymore. You know, it took me a while. It took until me and my kids started doing this side thing. We started doing a death metal album like in 2016 or 17 or something like that. And that really kind of got me back again a little bit, I would say.
Well, Worship, to me, the album is rooted in that mid to late 90s Hypocrisy sound, which was when the band started showing like the largest variety of styles within a single album. So on this new one, there's plenty of speed and barbaric riffs, as with the opening song and title track Worship, and also on Another Day. But there's some great slow and mid-tempo songs like Greedy Bastards, We're the Walking Dead, and the first single, Chemical Whore. Those happen to be all up in front of the album, and I think give a real good representation of what to expect.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, you have these three elements that I always talk about in Hypocrisy. You got the speed ones, you got the mid-tempo ones, and you got the slow, doomy, melancholy stuff as well. And nowadays, for me, it's just really to make more interesting songs, better songs in the vein of Hypocrisy. I don't want to change any styles or anything. I just want to make better songs, make it sound fresh, you know, and you just follow your heart when you do these things. So you have nobody to lean over to and say, hey, is this good? Is this bad? You learn over 30 years just to trust yourself, your own instinct, because if you're happy, then you won all the way anyhow, if you know what I mean, instead of trying to please people. That usually doesn't go so well.
When you release a new record, and especially this one after so many years, do you naturally look back and compare it to certain former releases, or do you just shut that door and always approach new material with a fresh perspective when it comes to your writing and the production and the entire package?
Yeah, when it came to writing, never look back, because I already know the songs in my head, so you can't get them out anyhow. So, I mean, for me, it was mainly to return to older albums, was just for me to see how I was singing in the past and in the previous, and, you know, through the whole 30 years of the career. And I really didn't know where to land with my voice, since I've been screwing around with it so much, you know. Some songs are really low growling, some other are more almost like black metal. So, I mean, for me, it was really hard to know when to do what. So I was listening through a lot of albums, and what you hear now is the conclusion I came up with, what should be what in every song. So
Dead World is a killer track as it blends old school and more modern sounds. And as you said, I think this was one that was either written by your son or co-written with your son. To me, this is one of the more standout songs on the album, especially with the varying speeds and the lyrical content. Can you tell us a little bit more about the track?
Yeah, actually it came from this thing that me and my kid was writing an album, and then we kind of, before I even put vocals or lyrics on them, we said, fuck it. So it's just laying around, and that was one of the songs, and I always loved that song, and I just asked him, you know, hey, let me use this in Hypocrisy, it's fucking great. And he's like, sure, no problem. So eventually I wrote lyrics about it, and it's not a happy lyrics. I don't think any of the songs on the album is very happy. I tried to stay true to what we see today, and from my point of view. And this one really tells you about what the government is doing with your money and doing with you.
Yeah, again, one of the more standout tracks for me on the first couple of listens. Now, you and Michael have been writing, recording, and touring together for 3 decades now. And Jorge...
Nah, that's not entirely true.
No?
Put it 2 decades.
2 decades, okay.
Yeah, the last decade, I done pretty much everything myself, except touring, of course.
Right. Well, you guys have been collaborating for such a long time, and of course, Jorge has been on board for a long time as well. When it came time to focus on the writing and recording of Worship after such a long time, was the process smooth right away, or were there any sort of setbacks or little mental barriers to overcome?
I don't know. I think I have had 7 songs or something like that, and then Michael and Jorge came to the studio for a week, and we were sitting trying to jam out to write songs together, and actually Chemical Jorge came out of that. It's one of a few songs where the whole band contribute at the same time. So, I mean, in the end, Michael contributed with 2 riffs, Jorge contributed with 2 riffs as well. Yeah, it mainly became the same as the last 10 years. I have to take care of all this shit, but I don't mind.
You only have yourself to blame.
If no one else can pull the wagon, then I have to pull it.
I'm familiar with that. The album artwork by Blake Armstrong is quite striking and depicts an extraterrestrials descending onto humans near what I would see as some sort of ceremonial or sacrificial monument. Tell us more about the art concept, and did you guys directly have input with that?
Yeah, I came up with the idea in, 2018 or something like that. I was in LA because I started going there frequently, like every 3 months or 4 months. I don't know. I found peace when I got to LA for some reason. So I stayed there a week for a couple of times a year. And I was in the hotel room, and all suddenly I had this vision that this would look cool. So I started with writing a pyramid, and then the Hippocross and some other small stuff on a piece of napkin. And I took a picture of it and sent it over to Gerardo at Nuclear Blast, and he helped me develop it. And eventually, I guess Blake developed it to 100% what we had in mind.
Very cool.
Yeah, I love it. It's really cool. Nice colors. It looks bombastic.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned how you guys sort of overdid it when you were touring for End of Disclosure. So with that, now that we have a new record, what might be the tour plans for Hypocrisy? I
know we have North America happening in end of April for a month. So that's going to be great. We're working on Europe right now. So I'm just hoping we can do at least one tour per, continent,
sure.
And then see if we do one more spin. It depends how crazy we got.
With such a great legacy of 3 decades of Hypocrisy, it's pretty amazing that I believe the band has been able to keep its original fan base a lot easier than, say, death metal bands or extreme metal bands that have that sort of a long career that you have. So I think there's something to your connection with your fans, as they don't want you to go away, man.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But also remember, we're not a band who ever peaked, So as soon as you peak, you're going to fight for your life to stay up there. Most of the bands, they just fall down and disappear after they peak on their popularity. We've always been constantly steady, I think.
A great way to look at it. Well, the new album, Worship, I'm glad I got an early copy. I'm really enjoying it, and congratulations on this caliber of a new album after 8 years. And
thank you,
man. Can't wait for North America in April 2022.
Yeah, exactly. It's time to get out. I can feel I'm jonesing like a mother.
Great talking to you, Peter. Thank you so much for taking time for the PodBlast.
Yeah, have a good one. Thank you very much, man.
This is the Nuclear PodBlast, the official podcast for Nuclear Blast Records.
I won't be coming home, I won't be going anywhere, I will guard this post forever. Here on the Alpine slope, where I did my final stand, I shall remain among the ice and snow that binds me to this mountain. A force of nature too strong, sent from above, where spirits lead the way, the winds will never fade. White Friday, I'll take the stairway to heaven. I'm sky high, when I die, I'll be immortal. Forever, I won't return to Blood Mountain. I am the soldier of heaven. I saw the end of war, I watched the soldiers come and go, and I kept my watch forever. So many brave men fell in the battles that were raging down below. I have seen it all, but none will hear my story. All of these years I have been frozen in time. I cried for spring to come, but here winter remain. White Friday, I'll take the stairway to heaven. I'm sky high, when I die, I'll be immortal. Forever, I won't return to Blood Mountain. I am the soldier of heaven.
Look out, the new Sabaton record, The War to End All Wars, out March 4th. That's Soldier of Heaven. That's quite a video if you haven't seen it. Check it out at the Nuclear Blast YouTube channel. Again, the new Sabaton record, March 4th. Hypocrisy before that with Chemical Whore. And of course, the one and only Peter Tägtgren. Thanks to that guy for another super interview. Love speaking with him. He's just such a pro. And a couple of new LP variants once again coming out at the Nuclear Blast online store February 18th. That'll actually do it for this episode of the Nuclear PodBlast. My name's Andrew Sample. Thanks again for listening and supporting Nuclear Blast here in North America and worldwide. A couple of tracks here before we're done. We'll do the new single Eye of the Storm from Battle Beast from Circus of Doom. That's out now. And right here from Comeback Kid, this track is called Crossed. It's featuring Joe from Gojira as well. The Heavy Steps album from Comeback Kid came out on January 21st. Again, this song is called Crossed. And thanks once again for listening to the Nuclear PodBlast.
If I can't protect myself, full friend and foe, can't tell which flowers spike me with thorns. Power me against power, spineless, pitiful. burning. Shame and disorder. What a waste, which one's worse? Silence and power. Shame on you. It's like it's really happening. Crossed over and destined into the void. It's like it's really happening. Crossed over and destined into the void. Energy sucker, take it from me. Now I can give, I can give until one too many second chances to a give another. Chaos I see into the void. Twisting destiny. Chaos I see into the void.
Find all the latest releases, bundles, and pre-orders at nuclearblastusa.com. Subscribe to the free email newsletter and receive a 10% off coupon to the Nuclear Blast USA online store.